in true Hardwood Knocks fashion, though, we have already gone 2 minutes over our time limit on this team. So do you want to take us to the next one?
Next up, we have the Los Angeles Clippers. My question for them is kind of simple. Can you run back a team that went 42-40 but couldn't make it through the play-in tournament? The obvious confounding variable there is health, because had Paul George been fully healthy all year, had Kawhi Leonard been available at all, they're probably not finding themselves in that situation. Those health concerns aren't going away. This is ultimately an older roster that is only going to keep getting older and doesn't really have that potential breakout young guy, nor does it have any cap space to go out and get anyone of significance. If you're looking to run it back, you're probably going to have to give Nick Batum a new contract. He has a $3.3 million player option that he's likely going to turn down. You're going to have to pay Isaiah Hartenstein. You're going to have to pick up Ivica Zubac's contract as a team option. So you can bring back the entirety of this core and see what happens, but is it worth it?
Yeah, I mean, this feels like a no-brainer. Yes. Like, who is the core piece that you're moving from this team? And
why? You can move Morris, maybe.
I don't consider him. See, that's where I guess we sort of diverge. Would be I'm looking at PG, Kawhi, Norman Powell, and that's like, probably Ivica Zubac needs to be there as well. And I just, everything points towards them running it back in some form because they already extended Robert Covington.
And that's part of the reason I went this route, is because their offseason's basically already done. Like, they're going to make small moves here and there, but like, what is the big question, if not whether it's worth running it back, because their hands are essentially tied here.
Yeah, I mean, they're going to have the mini mid-level to use, and I would anticipate them using that just based off how Steve Ballmer is spent. And this dovetails with my actual question for them, but what sort of happens with some of their own free agents? And Robert Covington's obviously removed from that, but Nicholas Batum as a player option, it feels like there's some quid pro quo there because he re-signed at they were able to re-sign him using non-bird rights last year, something I didn't anticipate being possible. And if he declines the player option, they now have his early bird rights, so they can pay him above the league average salary, which is quite substantial. At the same time, now that you have Robert Covington, now that you have Norman Powell, you have Terrence Mann, even Amir Coffey, who's a restricted free agent and was just quietly really good. For teams that are operating with sort of a beggar's dime, he would be someone to go after. You have him. Does that at all sort of change the calculus of how you're fleshing out your wing rotation? Also, Isaiah Hartenstein, great pickup by them. I still can't believe that he wasn't on a roster to start the year. Really good passer, solid rim protector. I don't want to say he has stretch to his game, but he can pop. And then he's also just, you don't look at him as this explosive finisher, but he can catch and finish above the rim. It's not these, highlight reel dunks, but he can do all of those things. And so I'm very curious to see how they prioritize some of maybe they bring all their own free agents back, but they're going to need their mini mid level, at least I would think, to keep Hartenstein at this point. And then are you going to pay Nick Batum? That would probably mean that Coffey's out the door. So one of those guys is probably gone. If all of them are back, I mean, good for the Clippers. But I'm also kind of wondering, I think it's overstated how much this team needs a floor general, but they could definitely use a connective passer or someone who could get them into their slower sets, just because right now you are so reliant on Reggie Jackson, Paul George, and Kawhi Leonard. And then you do have some secondary guys like a Luke Kennard off the dribble. Even Terrence Mann we saw. Norman Powell is going to give you rim pressure. But I'm talking about if you really need to slow it down and go through the motions, they don't really have anyone who's going to do that outside of Paul George and Kawhi. And I think you could argue that neither of those two is, again, those are very good. They could be 1A playmakers, but they're not. There's just a difference between a floor general. And I'm not saying they need a Ricky Rubio, someone with that type of command over the game, but are they going to go out and try and find a player like that? And maybe Ricky Rubio can be picked up on a bargain because he's coming back from that ACL injury, just someone who could give you spot minutes in those situations or fill in the gaps when you have players missing games. And when it's Paul George and Kawhi Leonard, the latter specifically, there's going to be missed games there. And so I've thought, just based off the salaries that they have, could they be a team that sort of enters the running for a Mike Conley on the trade market? I know a lot of people think he's cooked. He was really good this past season. He's had some issues the past two postseasons. You slot him into the Clippers team, it's a whole different world compared to where he's in Utah. Or can they get someone, this entails using your mini mid level, and I don't know what that means for Hartenstein. Can you get a DeLon Wright? That feels a little too cheap for DeLon Wright, who was really good for Atlanta this year. But that's the type of things I'm thinking about. It feels like this team, I don't want to say needs like a triple or a home run, but maybe a double. It can't be a single. and it can't be fully, it could be fully running it back and they might be the favorites, but you are still in a precarious situation should that happen. But what I'm laying out invariably probably comes at the expense of some of your own free agents, most notably Coffee and Hartenstein. If you let Hartenstein walk, I know bigs can be replaced on the cheap. The value he brought is just not something you're probably going to luck into a second time on a minimum contract.
And to your point about his stretchiness, I also think that gets a little bit overlooked. He went 19 of 34 on shots from 10 to 16 feet, didn't take a single long two beyond 16 feet, but went 14 of 30 on three-pointers. So small sample sizes, but 55.9% on that longer mid-range, on that shorter mid-range zone, and then 46.7% from beyond the arc. Is it sustainable and scalable? Probably not, but there's something there.
And the thing with him too, and this is not just like me being with the benefit of hindsight here. I thought, and I think we had this conversation between the two of us already. I thought that he did enough when he was with Cleveland in the preceding season to warrant an NBA contract. And then he did a lot of the same things, just in more volume with the Clippers. And look, he's not the most mobile rim protector, but opponent shot 47.5% against him at the rim. That was the stingiest mark this year among 163 players to challenge at least 150 of those shots at the rim. And his assist rate among all centers who averaged at least 15 minutes or more per game, 19.3 assist rate. That ranks 6th at the position. That is,
the man.
He's surrounded by good players, but you want your centers to be able to make those passes. And he's just, I think the point that you really ended up making, whether you meant to or not, is he's just one of the more versatile role playing bigs that you're going to be able to find. And so losing him isn't nothing, especially with Zubac is in the final year of his contract now all of a sudden. And so it's like, what are you doing? I know you want to downsize a lot, but I think you still need one more big on this team, where if it's Zubac and Hartenstein, okay, you're set, done. You're fine. Because you could downsize when you want, play big when you want. But if you lose Hartenstein, or even if maybe some people think they should trade Zubac and keep Hartenstein, that's not really an option unless Hartenstein can come back for your mini mid-level or less. But like they will still need a big if one of those two is gone. So they do still have, I guess, a relatively boring offseason, but it could be fascinating to me, at least on the margins. Yeah,
on the margins for sure, but just fewer like big decisions to make than we see from a lot of teams heading into the offseason.
I'm not going to give Steve Ballmer a pat on the back for paying the tax this past season. They did cut their bill with the Serge Ibaka trade, but I like the fact that they took on money while planning ahead for this season with the Norman Powell trade and Robert Covington. And by the way, I've said this like 80 times in the podcast, Portland not getting a first round pick this year while giving up Nance, McCollum, Covington, and Norman Powell at the same deadline.
It's not great.
No, it's not great.